Our first story tonight includes alleged Russian gangsters, Chinese middlemen, and a toxin that could be going right into people's homes. What they're all involved in is lumber and some of the wood that's used in floors. What we couldn't believe when we started investigating this piece is the shady backstory of how that flooring may be reaching your house. And as Shochat found out, it all begins in the lawless forests of Siberia.
It's overwhelming. It's arguably the hotspot of illegal logging.
For Sasha von Bismarck, who shot that footage of an illegal logger being chased through the Siberian forest, this is an environmental felony.
We've got 18 million cubic meters going over the border just from the Russian Far East to China every year, and we found that 80% of that is illegally cut.
A crime, he says, involves Russian mob bosses, Chinese middlemen, and some of the biggest corporations in the U.S. and Canada.
If you're there and you see the actual corruption and the way that the Chinese factories work and the way that the mafia is cutting down the forest, at each step you realize that cash that's being delivered in a suitcase is coming from you. Wouldn't be there otherwise. It's the demand that drives it.
It's the Russian mafia filling those suitcases with cash, capitalizing on that demand in the West by clear-cutting precious hardwood trees in the East.
It's organized crime, it's lawless, it's very dangerous, and it's funded by Chinese companies that are selling to us.
Organized crime, no question.
No question. You just be there for 2 days and you have no question that this is serious, organized, high-level violent crime.
Not hard to see. Not hard to prove.
Plain as day.
Crime, plain as day, the evidence out in the open. But the crime isn't just the forest destroyed. Felling white oak trees in this wild corner of Russia is also destroying the home of the world's last remaining Siberian tigers.
If you're there in the winter and getting up in the morning after fresh snow and seeing the paw prints directly next to your vehicle as you're trying to find illegal loggers, was really drove it home for me what's at stake there.
Sasha and his group have spent years following the lumber to try and stop the criminals and save the tigers' habitat.
As the forest disappears, what happens to the tigers?
It's going to be gone. It's good. I mean, gone in the wild. It'll be in zoos and circuses as it is. But the last 500 there. But the biggest danger for them is loss of habitat and loss of food.
Should we as Canadians, half a world away, care about that?
Oh, how can you not? Here you really have one of the most stunning creatures on Earth. 500 left.
This is what is happening to the home of that rare creature. After being cut down, it is loaded up and shipped off on Russian trains.
I was not prepared for the view, that feeling of oceans of forest being funneled through. It's breathtaking. You just feel the wood flow past you.
A flow of wood that leads across the border into China, the world's factory, where it is cut into floors.
North American companies, in your view, are turning a blind eye to all this illegality in order to get a better deal?
Absolutely. And until recently, in their eyes, it wasn't an illegality, which is sort of unfathomable to, I think, any neutral observer, that doing business in stolen goods is perfectly fine.
I started going over to China in 2004.
Don Finkel used to run the world's second biggest flooring company and now represents domestic U.S. hardwood suppliers. Cheap Chinese imports were undercutting his business.
If we were going to continue as manufacturers of wood flooring in the U.S., we were going to need to have some kind of manufacturing capability in China.
When he got to China, it didn't take Don long to figure out why those Chinese imports were so cheap. Producers were willing to sell dubious merchandise, which was cleaned up with fake paperwork.
Oh, I need some documentation on this wood to make it, appear legal. No problem. Just show me what it needs to look like. We'll provide that. Testing data? Sure, we'll put that stamp on your box. I'm not saying that every manufacturer in China will do that, but if you don't somehow weed out the bad guys, how are the good guys going to survive?
It wasn't just fake documents and manipulated test results that Don says he was offered.
The chairman tried to bribe my Asian president, offered him, I think it was $50,000 or $60,000, just right off the bat.
When bribery didn't work, he says the Chinese manufacturer tried one more thing.
These young girls who come in and their job is to try to get you drunk. Then one of them, though, was intent on coming back to my room with me, which I was, absolutely not going to do something like that. Because, first off, I wouldn't do that for a whole lot of reasons. But then you think, I've heard stories of people being blackmailed, in those situations. It made me think this is a bad place to do business. There's some reason that those tactics are necessary.
Finkel boarded a plane back to America. While the real businessman was heading home, Sasha von Bismarck was getting on a flight in the opposite direction, preparing to play the part of a fake businessman. Armed with a notebook and a hidden camera, Sasha wanted to find out where all that illegal wood was going. So pretending to be an American wood buyer, he headed to the crude wood cutting operations in Siberia.
If you start in the Russian forest, you will bump into what are called brigades of illegal loggers. And these are teams of 2 to 6 folks that have old World War II equipment, all entirely illegal, all cut in a national park or on someone's land.
Illegal activity that even forced the Russian government to clamp down. When Russian forest rangers raided a logging camp, Sasha went along and filmed it.
There is no shot, if you're fighting against the Russian mafia to protect the forest around Vladivostok, that you're going to win. If the biggest retail companies around the world are willingly accepting the illegal wood.
So consumers are supporting organized crime, whether they know it or not.
Absolutely.
With the aid of retailers who should know better.
Absolutely.
From the forests of Siberia, Sasha followed the wood to China, where, posing as a businessman interested in buying wood flooring, he was invited to dine with Chinese government officials.
The head of customs, you had 2 folks that presented themselves as generals in the army there to have a kind of welcome dinner for us who were just coming out of nowhere asking for wood and being offered illegal wood from Russia.
Inside sawmills, Sasha met with mill owners, and the story was the same. He caught it all on hidden camera.
The sawmill owners were just telling us, businessman to businessman, that it's 80% illegal.
80% illegal, a huge amount that shocked Sasha. But what he found out next alarmed him even more. A lot of that wood was ending up in the U.S. and Canada.
It's particularly unfair to the Canadian consumer that wants to buy some flooring. I mean, that you just know that you have to assume that wherever you go, you have a good chance of buying wood that was stolen from the last tiger habitat. I don't think anybody wants that. Unfortunately, that just blazed a trail that led predominantly to lumber liquidators.
Next, flooring that could be dangerous to your health.
We went into a retail store, grabbed a sample, tested it. 6 out of 8 flunked, and a lot of them flunked really bad.
Siberia, once a poor, closed-off land, now a moneymaker for mafia groups. Cutting some of that last old-growth forests in Asia, logging that threatens the survival of the world's remaining Siberian tigers. Sasha von Bismarck says that one company bears particular blame.
When we followed the wood, unfortunately, that just blazed a trail that led predominantly to lumber liquidators. The biggest flooring retailer in the United States was the single biggest customer of the company that was the biggest problem in the tiger habitat.
In his report, Shochat says he tracked white oak from Russian forests to factories in China, all the way to lumber liquidators in North America.
So would lumber liquidators have to be completely asleep or completely ignorant not to know exactly what was going on in China?
I mean, I can't look into their hearts, but those actions are not those of an individual or an institution that cares about the impact that their business is having on an entire region and on the extinction of the largest cat in the world.
Shochat's undercover operation didn't just expose illegally cut wood. He visited Chinese factories turning wood into floors, and in some of them, he saw something equally alarming.
What kind of images did you capture in your undercover work when it came to the use of chemicals to make flooring?
We immediately come face to face with just the overall lack of attention to detail in terms of how things are produced, and that includes that you're willing to take illegal wood, and the same attitude will affect what kind of chemicals you use to produce your products.
He says he found out something Chinese factory owners don't want you to know. Dangerous levels of chemicals used in the manufacturing of engineered wood floors, he says, may be ending up in your home.
When we're looking at any piece of wood that's glued together, we will go through that section of the factory where the big glue vat is, and we'll have some initial discussions about how does this process work, and you immediately then get told about how one can cut corners.
It's cheaper, but basically you double your production rate.
Kip Howlett is worried about formaldehyde used in making engineered wood flooring in China. He runs an industry association that represents Canadian and American wood flooring manufacturers.
If you jack up the amount of formaldehyde resin, that allows you to basically take your production rate on your press and increase it by 50%. So instead of making 1 million panels, you'll make 1.5 million panels.
Sounds good for business.
Well, sure, it's great for business.
Increased production might be good for the bottom line, but could be very bad for your health. Too much formaldehyde may cause upper throat and nasal cancers, as well as leukemia, according to the National Academies of Science.
It's a respiratory irritant at high levels. We require, in our laws, ample margins of safety that people are not going to smell it, have sensory irritation from it.
It's Kip's job to test engineered wood flooring made in North America and make sure it meets state regulations. About 5 years ago, he decided to test Chinese flooring too, to see what those levels were like.
Were these products that were way over the limits, way over the line?
Some of them were 2 to 3 times over the line.
2 to 3 times?
Yeah, I mean, it was like emissions that we used to see 30 years ago.
This spring, Kip did another round of tests on Chinese floors to see if there was any improvement.
We went into a retail store, grabbed a sample, tested it. 6 out of 8 flunked. And a lot of them flunked really bad.
6 out of 8?
Yeah, it's crazy. And yet the Canadian and U.S. producers are having to compete against that because it's got a 60% market share.
The Chinese are able to dominate the market because their products are so much cheaper. North America's demand for that cheaper flooring can lead to questionable product.
What the Chinese will tell you, if you want it to be the cheapest product, then I'll make you the cheapest product I can. If you want it to be a responsible product, I will make you a responsible product, but don't expect it to also be the cheapest product.
With Chinese manufacturers now producing so much of North America's flooring, doing the right thing could be losing out to saving money.
New at 5, Bay Area environmentalists sue a national flooring chain over a cancer-causing chemical that they say is found in some laminate wood flooring.
A new lawsuit claims that some of Lumber Liquidator's Chinese-made laminate floors have unacceptable levels of formaldehyde, 3.5 times the levels of American and European-made floors. We wanted to ask Lumber Liquidators about their flooring and whether any of their floors had high levels of formaldehyde. No one from Lumber Liquidators would talk to us on camera, but in a letter, they denied the allegations in the lawsuit and said their flooring meets relevant environmental standards and undergoes rigorous, independent third-party testing including those pertaining to formaldehyde emissions. We asked them whether they ever sold illegal Russian wood. They said no, and told us the sourcing, harvesting, and manufacturing of all of their products are designed to meet or exceed all applicable U.S. and international laws, and that Lumber Liquidators exceeds industry standards by making sure every shipment of wood is legal. They have a training program, regular independent audits, and use DNA tests to make sure the wood comes from permissible forests. They also say that Shochat's report contained fundamental inaccuracies and unsubstantiated claims. But Homeland Security and Justice Department officials took Shochat's report very seriously. They raided Lumber Liquidators' offices.
Several federal agencies are currently conducting an investigation at the headquarters for Lumber Liquidators.
We wanted to see if we could find that hardwood flooring processed in questionable Chinese factories that Shochat says could have been illegally cut in the Russian forest. So we went shopping.
Total is 127.49.
At Lumber Liquidators in Toronto, we found white oak, the same flooring traced by this identifying mark back to the same factory in China that Shochat says has processed illegal lumber from Russia.
It's outrageous, right? You've really got stolen product and you know what kind of organized crime is behind it. I think you would want to take some actions to show that you care and show that you're cleaning up your system, as opposed to hoping to make the last buck by selling it to some unwitting consumer in Canada.
16x9 also obtained these shipping records, showing that same company sent millions of dollars worth of wood to the Port of Vancouver, bound for North American store shelves.
We saw the way this company operates, and it has illegal wood all over its supply chain, and it willingly told us about that. In some cases, it was proud of it. You need to assume that it is illegal wood.
But despite all the evidence that Shochat found of illegal wood making its way to the West, the Canadian government told us there has not been a single charge against a person or a company for importing illegally cut lumber into Canada. For formaldehyde in imported floors, Canada only has voluntary guidelines, but no rules regulating emission levels.
Should we have rules in place that protect Canadian consumers from manufacturers that don't follow rules right now?
The answer to that question, I think, is clearly yes. The rules are there to protect people.
Don worries that unless the laws in Canada and the U.S. are strongly enforced, the consequences for manufacturers who follow the rules could be catastrophic.
The people that are doing it right will not economically survive. They will go out of business. And the people that are doing it wrong will prosper and grow until that's all that's left.
Are we part of the problem?
We're a huge part of the problem. If you take and rely on stolen material from a natural resource, eventually, because the guy who stole the log does not go back and replant the forest. That's a fundamental law. And if they don't, that forest is going to go away.